안녕하세요, 여러분의 한국어 선생님 고빌리입니다. Welcome to the second part of my analysis series where I take a look at the 8-member group Stray Kids. Now, if you're seeing me for the very first time, I am a Korean teacher who's been learning Korean for over 2 decades and teaching it here for over 13 years. And in our previous video, I took an in-depth look at Pangchan. So in this video, of course, I'm going to introduce you to Lino.
너라고 했어요. 쏠 수 있어? 안 나가.
And I'm going to be analyzing how he sounds overall when he speaks Korean, like his voice tone and his pronunciation, sharing any filler words and unique expressions that he uses, and even looking at his handwriting. These are things you're probably missing out on if you don't know fluent Korean, like I do. But first, I want to give a quick thanks to my Patreon supporters. I'm just one person, so I rely on my Patreon supporters to keep the lights on. So please consider joining my Patreon page at patreon.com/GoBillyKorean. It really helps me a lot to bring you more content just like this video, as well as to teach you Korean. Which, by the way, if you'd like to start learning Korean to be able to watch Stray Kids videos without subtitles, I created a textbook series called Korean Made Simple, that all of these are designed for self-study learners, so you don't need a teacher or a classroom. There are 3 textbooks and 3 optional workbooks, and you're going to learn everything from the very beginning in the alphabet all the way up to an intermediate level, which is enough for having basic, real-life conversations. And each textbook in the series also comes with culture notes, history notes, and even information about food. So it's pretty much everything you're going to need to visit Korea and make Korean friends. Now, there are audio files for all of these books as well, which you can download from my website, and you can find a link to get the first book in the video description and get started today. So thank you for listening to my ad, and with that, let's get into the full analysis of Lino, whose full Korean name is Lee Mino.
안녕하세요. 스트레이 키즈 리노입니다.
Lino was born in 1998 in the city of Gimpo, which is a little bit northwest of Seoul. In Stray Kids, he is the main dancer along with Hyunjin and Felix, and he also provides vocals. He enjoyed dancing since he was 12 and took classes and practiced all the way until his debut with Stray Kids. Now, as a high school student, he was even a backup dancer on tour with BTS. Crazy, I know, for nearly 3 years. So the guy can dance. In fact, being a backup dancer is what led him to decide to begin training at JYP Entertainment. And I also found something else interesting that he and I have in common, not dancing, because I definitely can't dance, but he also likes listening to horror radio shows.
비행기만 타면 무조건 아이패드 꺼내서 공포 라디오 같은 거 틀어서 막 아니 그걸 들으면서 자. 나 그거 좀 무서워.
Lino, if you need any recommendations for horror radio, hit me up because I like that too. Anyway, before I go in depth about his speech, let's talk about my first impressions. Now, again, I'm only going to be sharing a few clips from my research because I don't want this video to get taken down, but here is the first clip that I wanted to share. If I had to put Lino's personality into one word, I would say witty. And if you don't speak Korean, you're definitely missing out on half of the things he says because he's often telling jokes and he'll do it with a straight face.
민호 오빠, 정중하게 물어볼게. 결혼할래? 정중하게 거절할게.
Like in this next clip, Lino asks Hyunjin and Pangchan to guess each other's birthdays. And when neither of them reply right away, he quickly says, "We're editing that out." Okay, here's the first question.
그러면 두 분에 대해서 얼마나 잘 알고 있는지 한번 물어보겠습니다. 서창민 씨, 황현진 씨의 생일은? 편집해 주세요. 자, 질문 들어갈게요.
3월 20일이요.
자, 질문 가겠습니다.
Yeah, so it's just such a hilarious and witty response to Hyunjin and Changbin's blank expressions. And it does show that he really... You might think he's being serious when he's just joking. And here's another example where Felix asks how he's supposed to throw a baseball.
용복. 어떻게 던져?
그냥 손으로 던져.
여기서 정말 알려주십시오.
Or in this next clip, Changbin says that he thinks Lino and Pangchan don't really have that much in common. And Lino replies in a serious tone, "We do. We both have eyes and a nose."
근데 둘은 정말 형이라는 거 말고는 좀 공통점이 딱히 존재하진 않는 것 같아요.
공통점 존재하는데요?
별로 존재하지 않아요.
눈, 코.
네, 사람이란 것과 그리고 형이라는 거 말고는 큰 공통점은 존재하지 않는 것 같은데 공감을 안 하시네요.
둘 다 JYP다.
아, 둘 다 JYP다. 네, 공통점이 되게 많네요.
그러니까요.
공통점이 되게 많은데,
His expression is like, no, no, no.
네.
Actually, I think that Changbin and Lino are a perfect match for each other's sense of humor. It feels like they're both competing for the same laugh sometimes. Like, here's one more clip where Lino jokes about ordering everything from a restaurant menu, and I think he does it just to get a laugh out of Han and Seungmin,
나 이거 해보고 싶었어. 여기부터 여기까지 주세요.
which is also something that Changbin did too another time.
저기요! 여기서부터 여기까지 다 주세요.
Anyway, we'll see more of Changbin in the next episode. And Lino is also skilled at making puns, which again doesn't surprise me because it goes well with his sense of humor. And here's a clip where he makes a pun about the word 신혼 부부, meaning newly married couple. And Seungmin says that they had to take a test to get into the school. So Lino pretends that he misheard the word 시험 보고, meaning taking a test, as the word 신혼 부부. And again, he says it with his trademark straight face.
여기 시험 보고 들어온 거라고.
신혼부부가 들어갔다고?
그러게. 시험 보고 들어온 거라고. 여기는 엘리트들만 들어올 수 있는 거.
Seungmin's not biting though. I think he just likes making puns even when nobody laughs at them because it makes him happy. And here's one more example where Changbin says 제가 보기에는 means what I think, or literally how I see it. And 보기 sounds like Felix's Korean name 용복 with the subject marker E, which makes 용복이, or just 보기 as a nickname. So basically, to translate this naturally, Changbin first says what I think, and then Lino replies, you mean Felix?
많은 분들이 보기에, 그리고 제가 보기에는 여러분들이
보기?
네.
용복이요?
아, 진짜! 재미없습니다. 네.
At least Changbin appreciates Lino's unique sense of humor. Okay, those were just my first impressions then. So how does Lino sound when he speaks Korean? Well, I think he sounds really clear.
원장님 굿모닝.
지금 몇 시야?
출근 시간 10분 전이요.
He's hosted radio shows before, and he's also been the interviewer for many of their Two Kids Show episodes. And whenever he's presenting something on camera, he has this really professional voice that I think will be easy to understand even for many Korean learners.
투퀴즈의 은밀한 이야기와 음악이 함께하는 곳, 여기는 투퀴즈쇼입니다. 그리고 저는 투퀴즈쇼의 귀여운 MC 리노입니다. 후! 네, 오늘 소개해드릴 분은 저랑 아주 특별하고 끈질긴 인연이 있는 분들인데요.
Now, that's when he's presenting. So anytime you see him looking at a camera or like talking to someone and he's not close with them, he'll put on this like crystal clear audiobook quality voice. But that's not what he does most of the time. And here's how you're more likely to hear him speak.
감자탕 너무 헤비하다고? 야식으로 간단하게 먹고 싶으면 그럼 샐러드 드세요. 가볍게 먹을 거면. 샐러드 너무 좋네. 어우, 풀. 아, 나 이제 풀 씹는 소리도 싫어 막.
Not surprisingly, but he mumbles a bit more when he's by himself or just with the other members. Now, he doesn't mumble that bad, and he still has some of the clearest Korean in the group, but it is a little bit mumbly. Also, his voice pitch is a bit higher than the other members, which I think helps a lot with clarity. So in that clip that I just shared, I can hear something else that also makes him sound tiny bit harder to understand, and I'm going to play it one more time first before we talk about it.
야식으로 간단하게 먹고 싶으면 그럼 샐러드 드세요. 가볍게 먹을 거면. 샐러드 너무 좋네. 어우, 풀. 아, 나 이제 풀 씹는 소리도 싫어 막.
Besides his slight mumbling, there's something else that's going on, and that's the speed of his speech, because Lino thinks rather quickly, I believe. He's really witty, so because of that, he also talks really quickly.
이현이가 저랑 있으면 되게 진지한 얘기 좀 많이 하는 것 같아요. 고민이 있을 때 이렇게 얘기를 하거나 그러면은 이제 똑부러지게 대답을 해주는 것 같아요. 현실적으로 보고.
In fact, he talks so fast that he doesn't properly pronounce all of his consonants. Basically, he's thinking far ahead of what his mouth is doing, and I think that he is unconsciously abbreviating some of his sounds. So sometimes it sounds like he's using almost like his own kind of dialect, when really what it is he's just rushing through his sentences. In fact, a lot of his Korean sounds unique, and it is like he's using his own dialect sometimes. So here's an example of him using, again, it's not real dialect, but it's his own sort of, yeah, let's call it a dialect anyway.
곱창도 있고요. 소화시킬 파인애플도 있습니다. 이제 슬슬 짐을 풀어야지. 이거 자꾸 꺼져 근데.
So here he says, 이거 자꾸 왜 꺼져 근데? Which would normally be said a little bit differently, like, 근데 이거 왜 자꾸 꺼져? Which means, why does this keep turning off, though? But because he ordered the words differently, the sentence has a nuance more like, this keeps though turning off, why? So it's hard to even say it.
이거 자꾸 꺼져 근데.
I think this is also just a side effect of him thinking far ahead of what he's saying. So sometimes the words can get kind of rearranged when they come out. Again, this is not wrong. In Korean, you have a bit of flexibility with where words go in a sentence anyway. It's just less common. But what makes his Korean sometimes sound really like he's speaking dialect is not just this, but it's also his intonation, which I think is pretty expressive. Like I mentioned Bangchan's intonation being the most expressive, but Lino also sometimes uses intonation that's similar to some dialects.
곱창도 있고요. 소화시킬 파인애플도 있습니다. 이제 슬슬 짐을 풀어야지. 이거 자꾸 꺼져 근데.
And here's another example of his own style of speaking, and listen here to how fast he says it and his intonation.
아 셀카는 있지. 셀카는 있어. 걱정하지 마. 그럴 수 있어.
What he says is 셀카는 있지. 셀카는 있어. 셀카는 있어. 걱정하지 마. 응, 그럴 수 있어. And this is 5 separate sentences, but he says them all stuck together. So I think that's kind of a unique feature of his everyday speech is that he has a lot of things to say, and he also likes to shorten his sentences so he can get more out. And because of that, you get sentences that are sometimes shortened in a unique way.
아 셀카는 있지. 셀카는 있어. 걱정하지 마. 그럴 수 있어.
Okay, so I mentioned his intonation. Now I want to take another look at that. So here, I just want you to focus on his intonation in this next clip where he says, 모르겠다.
너 진짜 스트레스다 너. 모르겠다.
Don't learn intonation from Lino, but definitely learn dad jokes from him.
근데 이건 좀 아닌 것 같다. 라고 하면 그런 거고 뭐. 우리 애들 성향이 다 그러니까 그냥 딱 선 지키면서 딱 하니까.
Okay, one more clip, and again, focus on his intonation, especially at the very end of his sentence.
내가 다음날 구찌 그 쇼가 그 있었잖아. 쇼는 아니고 그
쇼가
행사가 있었잖아. 행사 있어. 아 이거 메모 관리해야 된다. 안 먹을 거라고 오늘 가서 죽어도 안 먹을 거다. 딱 했는데 음식 냄새가 미친 거야.
At the end here where he says 안 먹을 거다, it goes up quite high at the start, and then the end sounds like it stays flat. 거다. This is less common because typically the very end will go more down, and it'll look more like actually this. I have a little example of what it could look like. It's not wrong, it's just Lino. And just like Bangchan's intonation, I also like how he speaks overall, because I think that sort of boring monotone Korean you'll often hear in other language textbooks isn't as fun as like real lively Korean, especially what you're going to hear from a lot of the Stray Kids members. So yeah, it's just more interesting, I think. But I mentioned Bangchan's intonation, and there's actually one more thing that Lino has in common with him. And you can hear it if you listen to this next clip where he says yes in English.
Yes.
It's really soft, but it's also there, hiding sometimes when he pronounces letters where his tongue touches the teeth. So letters like S or J, Lino has a very slight lisp sometimes. And it's not noticeable unless you look for it. I really had to look for it because I didn't find it right away. But after I noticed it, I can barely hear it.
왔어. 안녕 둥둥아. 잘 잤어.
When he says the consonant 시옷, which is the S letter, it's barely there, but it sounds slightly like a TH sound.
자, 김승민 씨는 생일 라이브 방송 데코로 사용된 커다란 포착고 풍선이 마음에 들었는지 끝나고 집에 챙겨갔습니다. 그 후 시간이 꽤나 흐른 뒤였는데 대뜸 포착고 풍선 본가에 가져다 뒀다고 수줍게 알려주더라고요.
귀엽네.
심지어 바람도 리필했다고 합니다. 정말 마음에 들었나 봐요.
And it's the same for when he says the consonant 지읒, which is the J letter. Like in this clip where he says 저 서울에서 왔어요.
어디서 오셨어요?
저 서울에서 왔어요.
And he does that again in this clip, especially where he says 저는 and 좀.
저는 일단 그냥 치고 박는 그냥 스타일이었어요. 원래 좀 그랬는데 뭐 이래저래 하다 보니까 되게 부질없게 느껴지고 세상 일이 제가 원하는 대로 되는 건 아니잖아요. 그러니까 그냥 흘러가는 대로 냅둬야겠다라고 생각을 해서 그게 어느 순간 문득 그거를 깨달았다기보다는 그냥 살아가다 보니까 그냥 좀 많은 걸 내려놓고 되게
I actually don't think that he has a real lisp. What I think it is instead is that when he's talking softly, he's not properly pronouncing some of his letters. So that's why it can sound like a lisp at times. And whenever I hear him speaking just a tiny bit louder, it suddenly disappears. It's just a part of him shortening everything. He's shortened so much that he shortened his tongue. So I don't know. And I have another clip where you can slightly hear that lisp, especially where he says yes. But because he's also shortening some of his sounds, he also ends up mispronouncing the word 공항 here, meaning airport. And he says it kind of like 공항, 공항, without the ng sound at the end.
Yes. 내일 일본으로 가기 위해 짐을 싸고 그리고 김포공항 출발이니까 김포공항이랑 가까운 저희 집에 갈 거예요.
And here's another example where he doesn't pronounce the consonant 비읍, which is the B letter in the word 부럽지, 부럽지, where it almost sounds like a V. It's like 부럽지, 부럽지, kind of.
아, 재밌겠다.
부럽지? 얼마 전에 집 갔을 때 순이랑 싸웠는데
왜?
가만히 누워있는데 형 갈게 했더니 나 물었어.
Then besides these things I pointed out, what do I think about his voice tone overall? Well, I think he sounds really gentle. Like, he doesn't put on a tough guy voice at all. He always sounds like he's considering what other people are thinking. And so he just sounds really gentle, even when he's like teasing the other members. Anyway, so now I want to talk a little bit about his usage of filler words. And you know what? Something surprised me is that it wasn't easy to find what his filler words are. I said he's always thinking about what he wants to say and then, compressing his sounds together. Funnily enough, then, he doesn't like to waste space with many filler words. I did find a few filler words that he uses more often than others, but I still think he uses them a lot more sparingly than the other members, and he speaks concisely, which I think also kind of adds to his overall, gentle, kind of honest feeling. So I did find 3 filler words that I want to point out, which he sometimes uses, and here is the first one, so see if you can find it too.
제 생일이에요. 뭘 효과 이런 거 없었나? 24일에 같이 수다를 떨고 있는데 동물은 이렇게 간다는 거예요. 아쿠아리움, 수족관을 간대. 그래서 겸사겸사 따라가서 블루베리 스무디 먹고 그랬어요. 이건 고양이? 영어가 이렇게 되었으니
The first one is 뭐, which means what, but it can be used as a filler word when you don't know what to say, and it makes it sound like a little bit softer. So it's kind of like literally saying, what can I say? And again, he doesn't overuse this word or any other filler word. Anyway, here is the next filler word.
이게 일상을 돌아다니면서 뭔가 카메라 이렇게 목에다 걸고 이렇게 찍어 보려고 그치 아무래도 이렇게 핸드폰을 충전해놓고 이렇게 자면은 알람 딱 끄고 이제 이렇게 해서 오늘도 정말 이렇게 힘든 하루를 보내야지 왜 딱 잠 들려가려고 이렇게 좀 들려가려고 할 때도 징 거리면은 되게 기분 나쁘거든요. 이렇게 이렇게 하면 힘들겠지? 그지?
This is 이렇게, and it means like this. And you can use it as a filler word to kind of have the nuance of like you're trying extra hard to describe something, but it can also just kind of translate as well as like. And finally, last but not least, here's one more filler word that he uses that might not sound like a filler word.
어제 그냥 어제 며칠 전 그렇구나 하고 저는 이제 삼자를 통해서 전달을 받았죠. 그러고서 이제 한이를 만나서 23일날 한이를 만나서 같이 수다를 떨고 있는데 운동에 집중하시도록 하세요. 그리고 여기 보시면은 해피 리노데이라고 해서 치열한 경쟁 속의 사람은 승승거리노와 결과를 내고 있다고.
This isn't a word, it's just the sound which is basically like saying when you're thinking. And in Korean, instead, it's more common when you're thinking about something to just leave an empty gap for a second. Don't use the words or when you're speaking Korean because they're not necessary. Now, there are ways that they will express that they're still thinking about something. And if you want to emphasize that, like, hey, hold on a second, I'm still thinking, in that case, you can use sounds like these, like or oh in Korean. And that is what he is doing here. In fact, I almost couldn't notice though that he was using this filler word at all because he says it so softly and he's not saying this to the listener actually. He's just saying it to himself, which just confirms to me even more that he is really concise when he speaks. Okay. Now, before we go, I want to take a quick look at some of his handwriting. And I'm really interested to see how he writes because, as some of you know, Lino is actually ambidextrous, meaning he can write with both hands. He was actually left-handed originally, but he practiced so that he can use his right hand as well. And here's a clip of why you should never ask Lino if he's left-handed while he's holding a knife.
여보 왼손잡이였어? 뭐? 미안.
So I have two notes that he wrote both with his right hand, and the first one is a note that he wrote to IN.
막내 건강하게 크려무나 리.
I notice he also writes the consonant lir, that's the L letter, smooth like a snake, which is pretty common. And you can see that especially where he writes his own name at the end. He just writes Li. And I also noticed from that whenever he writes any vertical letter, he kind of gives the bottom part a flick back up. I've never seen anyone do that so far since I started making these analysis videos. You can see it on the word Li, his name at the end. But anytime there's a vertical stroke, both in his consonants and vowels, there's just a little kind of flick going back up. Now, his writing also looks very vertical overall, I would say. Instead of writing the letters in kind of square boxes, which is more standard, he writes them in kind of like stretched rectangles. And this is something that I'll commonly see when people are writing in cursive, like if someone's writing poems, but it's just his style. I think overall it's really nice and for me, incredibly easy to read. What he wrote also itself is casual. It's filled with dry humor, as you would expect. And if I translate it, it's basically like saying, IN, it's me. How's life being the youngest? Your older brothers are so clingy, but you know that you like that, don't you? I know everything. Grow up big and strong, Lee. And let's just look at one more note, though, that he wrote to Felix.
그날을 기다리며 사요나라.
And I wanted to look at one more just to see if there are any similarities. And yes, I can see the exact same things here. His L letters, the little flick at the bottom of his vertical strokes, and his slightly stretched vertical syllables. And in this letter, he suggests that they both go eat 감자탕 next time, which is like a pork bone stew, and it's one of my favorite foods, but you have to go with a group of people, at least one other person, because there's always too much to eat by yourself. Okay, I could keep going on and on, but there are still 6 more members we have to analyze, so that's enough for today. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe to my channel for more Korean language content. Thank you again to my Patreon supporters and channel members for making this series possible. Please check out my Patreon page in the video description. It's patreon.com/GoBillyKorean. If you'd like to help support my channel, it really helps a lot. You'll also get some cool benefits like Korean cheat sheets, study guides, vocabulary decks, and more. So thank you for watching, and I will see you again in the next episode. 그럼 다음에 또 봐!